What pisses me off the most about the recent spat of Milo controversy is that, again, like the countless times before, everyone within this community rallied to his defense without question. This guy has turned somewhat into a messiah or an untouchable, someone who must be kept going no matter what for the supposed greater good, and to advance the cause of ending censorship and the culture of political correctness, no matter the consequences. And I'm sorry to say, well, in fact, I'm not sorry to say, no. No matter how important this cause we might be fighting for may be considered to be, I am not willing to throw my ideals and principles overboard to ally with each and every runaround idiot who is good at triggering just because it helps the supposed greater good. Since 2012, when feminism infested a YouTube atheist community, which then grew through Gamergate into being a wider community that is opposed to social justice, censorship, and its advances into a cultural sphere, triggering has become somewhat of a favorite for us to engage in. After all, our opponents have invented that notion and applied it to any kind of critique of their positions. But let me just put something out there bluntly. Triggering alone is an absolutely useless position. Being politically incorrect alone is an absolutely irrelevant and useless position. Merely ridiculing people without putting forward any arguments and positions of what you are for is a useless measure. It is not some kind of intellectual position, let alone any kind of argument. To make it brief, annoying people is something any village drunkard can do. Shock value alone is absolutely worthless if you have no message to convey and if you have nothing to propose that you may actually stand for. Milo has about the same value to public discourse as the Moon Man meme. And if you ask what he stands for, we get a shitload of nonsense. We get apologetics for child abuse, the denial of science, Catholic guilt evangelism, and other horse shit. Things that have been disregarded by people within this community for years. If you want to look deeper into what this man actually even stands for, you have to go and look for some of the articles he wrote before he joined Gamergate, where he advocated for the very things Gamergate was against, mere weeks before Gamergate kicked off. At this point, I'd like to tell all of you to go and watch this video by Creationist Cat. He did an excellent job in sifting through the cesspit that are articles Milo published prior to his fame through Gamergate and pointing out the blatant hypocrisy of this man. Seriously, go watch CC's video. It's absolutely worth your time and views. Best of all is his proposal for a troll watch, where he advocates for the very things that the Zoe Quinns, Randy Lee Harpers and Anita Sarkeesians advocated for. Take back the internet with manners. Well, fuck off. Not only that, he proposed that so-called trolls, which he probably reserves the right to define upon himself, should be doxed. Yay. But here's the most glorious part of all of this. So perhaps what's needed now is a bolder form of censor after all, because the internet is not a universal human right. If people cannot be trusted to treat one another with respect, dignity and consideration, perhaps they deserve to have their online freedoms curtailed. For sure, the best we could ever hope for is a smattering of unflattering show trials. But if the internet, ubiquitous as it now is, proves too dangerous in the hands of psychologically fragile, perhaps access to it ought to be restricted. We ban drunks from driving because they're a danger to others. Isn't it time we did the same to trolls? That's a comment by Jeremy Thorpe. I have no fucking clue who Jeremy Thorpe is. However, here he is at Milo's Facebook reminding Milo Yiannopolous of his views, probably with the intention of getting a comment on it. Now, every decent person confronted with prior views they supposedly disregarded in latter life due to experience would take their mistakes, stand up with them, and proclaim, yes, I wrote this crap and now I disavow it. However, in this case here, we see Milo Yiannopolous, the oh-so-virtuous warrior of free speech, deleting comments questioning his sincerity and questioning his motives. Even more ironic being that he deleted this comment during a supposed free speech campaign started due to his banning on Twitter. Milo in the end stands for nothing, has nothing to offer to any conversation, and the only thing he will be in support thought of is himself and his inflated ego. Milo got into Gamergate for a guy called Steve Tom Sawyer when Milo built an alternative gaming media podcast called Radio Nero. According to Steve, Milo didn't even know how to play Counter-Strike until they met. Milo paid Steve to build up a podcast, hire a sound technician, and research material for their podcast, and then Milo simply disappeared when he had no longer need for them, leaving them with work and with bills to pay, only to then let his fucking assistant write Steve an email telling him he was no longer needed, leaving Steve Tom Sawyer at the brink of bankruptcy and homelessness. It wasn't until much later that Milo was guilted by Robin into sending Steve Tom Sawyer an email asking how he was.
Yep, that's right, Kraut. It's all true.
And guess what? We have the email with which Steve Tom Sawyer replied. He expressed frustration over how he felt used by Milo, who seems to him had no other intention but to use him as a stepping stone to becoming some conservative celebrity. Well, how the fuck do we have access to this email? Why can we read it? Well, because apparently Milo thought the right reply to this legitimate complaint was not to reply in an email, but to send this email to the Ralph Retort to publish as a piece claiming that Steve attempted to blackmail Milo, as well as several other pieces dragging Steve's reputation through the dirt. Besides the fact that Milo apparently is too much of a weakling to do his own fucking dirty work, this just happens to fall into a pattern that has been continuing for more than 4 years. Take Milo's project The Colonel, where his former employees are now suing him for not paying them thousands of pounds of payment that were not paid to contributors. Take the fact that in the recent Milo scandal, it was his co-workers who demanded that he no longer work for Breitbart. This is a man who repeatedly likes to throw around the word sociopathy when talking of his opponents, which however seems to be nothing but projection, since his behavior seems to be nothing less than the behavior of a sociopath who walks from person to person, uses that person for his own goals, refuses to even pay the people who work for him, goes so far as to humiliate those who complain about the treatment, and simply seems to cast people aside like used condoms as soon as they no longer serve a purpose in his goal of becoming some weird, deformed Frankenstein's Hitchens for a conservative movement. But let's get into the meat of the most recent scandal that everyone rallied around. Funny enough, the first thing that caught my eye back then wasn't the scandal itself, but watching it being talked about on the Drunken Peasants podcast, and the revelation that Milo wouldn't come onto the podcast again unless Paul wasn't present. And wow, the glorious Milo, not scared of opponents of any kind, is scared of Paul. Whatever you may think of that podcast, whatever you may think of Paul, it's an utter and complete irrelevance in this case, and frankly, the Drunken Peasants should be applauded for not bending to the whims and neuroses of this fucking sociopath. It's true that the main core of the media used this opportunity to create an image of him being out there and advocating pedophilia, or even being a pedophile himself, but that is no excuse to be uncritical of the things he actually said. I find it amazing how people immediately in the aftermath of this brought out articles published on Salon making excuses for pedophilia, as well as statements by George Takei which, according to the desperate defenders of Milo, suggest he defended pedophilia, as if to say, hey guys, our opponents are just as bad, so it's okay if one of us says repugnant shit like this. No, fuck that. There can be no valid excuse for pedophilia, especially not by a guy who repeatedly laments how other people supposedly are pedophiles, and the guy who toys and plays around with this topic like some Twitter hashtag. Milo claims that it is normal in the gay community for older men to have sexual relationships with younger boys, thereby condemning millions of gays around the world to supposedly having the same standards as he has. That coming from a gay man who repeatedly laments his own sexuality and goes on guilt evangelism, all whilst playing identity politics. Oh, you can't disagree with me and my views because I'm a gay and I suck black dick. Well, guess what? Most people who throughout the last decades have campaigned for gay equality have done so not to have gay people elevated into some special position where we all have to bow before them or create some special space of safety for them, but for gay people to be able to live in peace amongst us as equal citizens with equal equal rights and, most importantly, in equal standing. Being a gay conservative doesn't make you special. In fact, it has been the goal of egalitarian movements to bring gay people into a social standing where they can choose their political association without fear of consequences. And more importantly, without having to deal with the slanderous and wretched accusation of being a slippery slope leading to pedophilia. Gay people around the world go through different experiences in discovering their sexuality, and the disgusting insinuation that they are some cabal of a community that normalizes pedophilia amongst themselves is the same kind of revolting nonsense that has been peddled for ages by fanatical religious natters for decades. Milo's experiences of supposedly being abused as a child does not give him license to project these upon what he perceives to be a gay community. But far more revolting to me, as someone who grew up in a deeply Catholic conservative part of this world, is the insinuation that somehow children are predators in this situation. Seriously, fuck you. Milo, who then humbly goes upon a press conference to announce that he had exposed pedophiles within liberal establishments, whilst he himself insinuated that the biggest ever cover-up of sexual abuse of children might have something to do with children being the sexual predators. I grew up within a community close to an institution where Catholic dignitaries abused children, a place where the Catholic Church had significant power and influence not only over the lives of peoples but the institutions surrounding their lives. And I remember seeing psychologically crippled men aged 40 who looked like they were 80 after dealing with years of alcoholism as a result of having their childhood ripped away from them and torn apart. And I remember how questions about them were answered with phrases such as, "Oh, den haben's wir noch jung war gedingselt," which roughly translates to, "Oh, when he was a kid they used to do things with him." It baffled me for a long while in my life how a rape of a child can turn into something as banal as "did things with him." Throughout small rural and urban communities of families in Germany, Italy, Ireland, California and Boston, to Catholic schools all across the world, a climate of fear and daring not to speak up against an authority has led to the cruel abuse of children over the course of several decades, if not even centuries. And up drops this petulant little cocksucker to tell stories of children having sexual relations with priests as sexual predators, whilst licking the arse of the Catholic Church consistently, both in the past at his tenure at the Catholic Herald and on his recent tour. And then he is surprised when Siegpack disinvites him. It is fucking amazing how this guy, every time he managed to get the furor of any liberal institution, doubled down. Yet when a conservative institution has had enough of him, he cowers, apologizes, and pleads for clemency in a suit and tie. It's amazing this is being built up to this media conspiracy. There are indications that press outlets shared this story prior to its publication, but it is simply a fact that it was a mere 16-year-old girl who, after seeing his statements, decided to contact the Reagan Battalion and share the clip with them. This is not a media conspiracy. I guess the rural conservatives, the small-town conservatives, to whom family, going to church, and having a life based on security and tradition are important, are not impressed by a pompous moron who built a career on triggering and writing things like, "Although Reagan lacked my intellectual rigor and innate leadership qualities, he was a good man, but even he needed a little lift now and again." Let alone by stories of children being sexual predators. And I myself, who has been in conflict with political correctness as well as dogma, am not impressed with someone who, besides being a living incarnation of a meme, has really nothing to add to a conversation besides triggering people. I am not impressed by his stories of children being sexual predators. I am not impressed with his narcissism. I am not impressed with his track record. I am not impressed with how he treats people who work for him. And lastly, I am not impressed with his stories. On Joe Rogan's show, he claims to have lost his virginity to a transvestite in an interracial fivesome, and then on his press conference talks about being molested as a child. What is it now? And why can't I help but think that you're a bullshitter with a career built upon lies, useless shock value, and exploiting those who work for you? But in the end, I'm going to give way on my platform to someone else to speak. Someone who I believe, through his personal experience, is someone who should be heard in this situation and whose judgment is, in my humble opinion, of more importance in this matter.
Hi, I'm Baz, also known as Furious Fosser on my YouTube channel, or Twitter, and other various social medias. Before I go into my issues with what Milo has done, I want to first say I was a victim of sexual molestation, among other things, at the hands of my father, so I can somewhat understand his mindset for certain things that he said. Secondly, being a victim does not give you a pass for everything for the rest of your life. On top of that, it certainly doesn't give you a pass to leave others to be subjected to the same fate, whilst doing nothing to save them or at least bothering to try and bring the perpetrators to justice. What am I referring to, you may ask? I'm talking about the comments concerning the Hollywood parties he attended at around age 22/21. It's a short clip, so I will play it in full first, so you have the proper context, and then go into the very worrying parts.
Do you think that's what's going on with that guy who directed X-Men? Bunch of
Bryan Singer?
Yeah, a bunch of 14-year-old predators going after that poor man.
I'm not sure it's the case with him, no.
That's a guy.
You know, I lived in Hollywood a while ago.
Did you?
Briefly. And,
did you go to one of his parties?
I went to other people who I won't name of a similar stature in Hollywood. I went to their boat parties and to their house parties and things, and some of the things I have seen have beggared belief.
Yeah? Can you give us like a...
Well, just... I don't want to be indiscreet about specific people.
Right, you don't have to do that.
It's going
just dance around the facts.
Yeah, dangerous. But I can tell you the truth without dropping anyone in it.
Okay.
I mean, some of the boys there were very young. Very young.
And this is really recently?
I don't remember... No, like, I don't know, 8 years ago. I don't remember...
Statute of limitations.
I don't remember whether I ever met Bryan Singer or whether I even knew who he was then. But I knew other people of similar stature, as I say, and there were some very young boys around at that time. There was a lot of drugs and a lot of...
twinks.
A lot of twinks taking drugs and having unsafe sex with older men, and some of these boys were very young.
What did you think about...
Desperate for a job.
It's worth noting that clip comes directly after they are talking about him being a predator at 14 with the priest. And then Joe follows up asking...
Do you think that's what's going on with that guy who directed X-Men? Bunch of...
Bryan Singer?
Yeah, a bunch of 14-year-old predators going after that poor man.
So, we're talking about minors. Now, I really don't care if it's paedophilia, hebephilia, I don't care. It's illegal. We're talking about sex with minors in California, where Hollywood is located, and their age of consent is 18. So bear that in mind when excuses are made for this shit. When someone says they could be 16-year-olds, because it's still sex with a minor. But it clearly means at very least 13 to 14-year-olds. So with the context set for 14-year-olds, Milo still goes out of his way to repeat 4 times, very young boys. Very young boys.
Okay.
I mean, some of the boys there were very young. Very young.
Not young boys, very young boys.
And there were some very young boys around at that time. There was a lot of drugs and a lot of...
twinks.
A lot of twinks taking drugs and having unsafe sex with older men, and some of these boys were very young.
What did you think about...
Desperate for a job.
Okay. Now, it seems to me that every time someone is defending Milo on this point, they'll drop the very and just say young boys could mean 18 or 16, you don't know.
Young boys does not necessarily mean children. Like, when I first heard this, I thought the same thing. I was like, what, you were at a party where people were fucking young boys? What the fuck is wrong with you?
And there were some very young boys.
Young boys.
Very young boys.
Young boys.
Very young boys.
I was like, what, you were at a party where people were fucking young boys? What the...
There was a lot of drugs and a lot of...
twinks.
A lot of twinks taking drugs and having unsafe sex with older men, and some of these boys were very young.
Were fucking young boys?
Boys were very young.
Young boys? Very young.
But no, that's not what he said. He said very young boys. They always drop the very. Like the word very doesn't have a whole new world of connotations to it. Now, before I make my other point, you need to bear in mind, Milo himself said parties, not party, right? Parties, plural. When people say he could be sued for libel, he had multiple chances to collect evidence, right? There's a million different ways he could have blew this out of the water if he'd collected evidence. He could be killed, is another one. He clearly isn't that scared of these people if he's willing to go to multiple parties, is he? But all that aside, I don't give a fucking shit if he could be sued for libel, or if he might be in some danger. Because you know what's more important? Kids, and the safety of them. Stopping kids from being pumped full of drugs and raped at the behest of old perverts. That's more important than someone maybe being sued for libel or being in danger. Speaking up could have caused a chain reaction of other people speaking up. Could cause an investigation into someone serious. So he's either full of shit and made the whole thing up, which is a sick fucking thing to make up, or he's more bothered about hurting someone's reputation or risking his own. And fuck anyone who tried to make this a partisan issue. You put sides over the safety of kids, over his inaction that left kids in dire despair. People who put the culture war above the need for justice. You betrayed your principles and in the process ignored horrific atrocities. He said they were looking for work. It's been argued that this shows a level of maturity, which is just beyond absurd. My 9-year-old son wants to get a job so he can get some money. How many kids set up lemonade stalls? How many kids have paper runs? How many child actors are there in Hollywood? Corey Feldman has claimed to have been a victim of exactly this type of event. Imagine the amount of suffering Milo could have prevented if he'd blown the lid on this shit. But sorry, I forgot. We shouldn't criticise. It's much more important that we beat the SJWs and not dance to their tune at any cost. Because God forbid that our ideals would link up at any point, eh? God forbid we'd put aside petty fucking squabbles about gender pronouns and safe spaces to rise above it for the sake of some kids. Obviously much more important that we beat SJWs and not dance to their tune at any cost. Mundane Matt claimed that Milo was joking. I asked him to clarify several times how he knew such a thing was a joke, because I really don't see how it could be considered one. He never answered. This is the level of delusion that some people are willing to go. It doesn't even sound like a joke. He's been pushing out videos defending Milo, and even after being aware of the parties, he still makes a video talking about George Takei as if it's comparable.
When someone like George Takei can say something similar and in far more graphic detail.
Yeah, sure, Matt. Takei totally went into more detail than someone talking about parties with very young boys being drugged and raped. Sure. He says it's due to political bias, and maybe for some it is, but again, he's purposely ignoring the parties when he knows about them. I've tweeted at him several times, and other people have also tweeted at him the clips. So why did Matt purposely leave that bit out? Why has he refused to address it on Twitter? I'll be candid here. It's because he's a dishonest fucking snake. So next time you try and put forward an excuse for Milo's inaction, ask yourself this first. Whether it's about safety or about how useful he is against SJWs, ask yourself, is my reason good enough to excuse him leaving those very young boys to such a horrific fate? Thank you for listening, and thank you, Kraut, for giving me a chance to add my input. Take care, everyone.